Welcome to a focused discussion designed specifically for you, the discerning listener. We are setting aside the noise and the information overload today and turning to a meticulously arranged source of profound insight, the Book of Psalms. We are going straight into one single powerful text, Psalm 25.
That's right. Our focus today is Psalm 25, a crucial cornerstone within the first major collection of the Psalter, that is Book 1, which covers Psalms 1 through 41. And the vast reservoir of spiritual guidance we are drawing upon, curated by the UNFIJ and Jesus team, presents this psalm as a masterclass. It's really a complete guide for how a believer approaches God when they're facing intense external trials, but also, and this is key, coupled with the weight of internal guilt.
And when we look at Book 1, what we see is this intensely personal material, isn't it? It's largely attributed to King David. It really feels like a record of the individual soul's journey. You have trouble, trust, persecution, and then deliverance. But there's something important about the divine name that's emphasized here.
Exactly. You've hit on a really crucial point. Throughout Book 1, the dominant name for God is Yahweh. And in most translations, that's rendered as the Lord, with all capital letters. This isn't the generic name for God, Elohim, which you see more frequently in later sections of the Psalter. The consistent use of Yahweh emphasizes God's faithful, covenant-keeping relationship. It's the relationship based on him binding himself to his people. So this covenant context, it frames Psalm 25 as this deeply honest prayer where David is appealing not to some distant deity, but to his faithful covenant Lord.
And our mission today is to undertake a detailed verse-by-verse exploration of this very text. I find this psalm so rich because it just defies simple categorization. It's an acrostic, a lament, a wisdom text, and a penitential prayer all in one. It really provides a comprehensive model for humility, guidance, and unwavering trust when life hits the hardest.
It truly is essential. David, perhaps facing a coup or some intense persecution, he models a complete approach to God. This prayer starts with a total foundational surrender, yet it concludes with a remarkably selfless national intercession. We are really examining how a spiritual leader deals with external enemies and unconfessed sin simultaneously, recognizing that those two struggles are often, intertwined.
Okay, let's unpack this prayer and start at the very beginning, the foundation of surrender, and this unique structure that informs the entire text.
So before we even read the first verse, we really must appreciate the structure. Psalm 25 is not a spontaneous, rushed cry for help. It is a carefully constructed prayer. It's acrostic form, where each verse in the original Hebrew begins with a successive letter of the alphabet that is incredibly significant.
I think we often miss that structural detail, don't we? We just treat it like any other poem. But that tells us so much about the intention behind the prayer.
It suggests a deliberate, comprehensive meditation. Think of it this way. Writing an acrostic is hard. It's really difficult. It forces the author to cover every possible concept related to the subject, ensuring completeness, from A to Z. This structure confirms that the psalm is intended as a teaching text. And the UNFIJ and Jesus team really emphasizes this structural detail in their materials, noting that David is giving us a step-by-step methodology for approaching God. It ensures that no aspect of the relationship, from trust to confession to intercession, is accidentally left out.
So David is not just praying, he's creating a curriculum for future believers who find themselves caught between their own failures and external pressures. Let's start with that foundational act of surrender in verse 1.
David opens by declaring his total dependence on the covenant God.
Unto thee, O Lord, do I lift up my soul. Psalm 25.1.
The Hebrew phrase translated, lift up my soul, is profoundly active. It's far more than a passing thought or like a sigh of resignation. It is the conscious, decisive directing of one's entire inner being toward God. And we're talking about the tripartite soul, the will, the emotions, and the mind. It is an act of complete dependence and radical surrender.
And here's where the practical application really hits me. In moments of crisis, we so often lift up our fear to our mind, or our anger to our tongue, or our anxiety to our circumstances. David models choosing deliberately to lift his entire soul, his control, his feelings, his direction to God.
That choice to actively direct your whole being toward God, the source of help, rather than just letting your emotional turmoil run wild, that is the foundational step. Because if your soul is lifted to the Lord, it cannot be simultaneously fixated on the crisis or on the enemy.
Right. And that act of surrender immediately produces this plea for vindication, which tells us that the surrender itself is a really high-stakes move.
Absolutely. The stakes are immense, which leads us right into the plea in the next two verses.
Oh my God, I trust in thee. Let me not be ashamed. Let not mine enemies triumph over me. Yea, let none that wait on thee be ashamed. Let them be ashamed which transgress without cause. Psalm 25.2-3.
David's plea, "Let me not be ashamed," is central to the entire psalm, and frankly, to the ancient world's concept of honor and faith. In David's context, shame wasn't just some internal embarrassment. It was a public disgrace. I mean, to be ridiculed in the town square. He is asking for his trust in God to be publicly validated so that he doesn't look foolish to the watching enemies.
So their triumph over him wouldn't just be a political victory, it would be seen as a failure of God's faithfulness. A
Exactly.
public shaming of the entire community that trusts in Yahweh.
Precisely. And that's why his personal plea immediately expands to a defense of the entire faith community. He shifts focus and says, "Yea, let none that wait on thee be ashamed."
Mm.
And that phrase, "wait on thee," signifies placing hope and expectation entirely in God's timing and power. David recognizes that his reputation is tied to God's, and by extension, the reputation of all those who choose to hope in the covenant Lord.
And this is where we see that magnificent bridge between David's ancient hope and the definitive New Testament assurance that the "you need faith in Jesus" team highlights.
Yes, we really must explore the difference in that shame.
Yeah.
For David, the immediate shame was public humiliation by, tribal enemies. For us, Paul gives this assurance an eternal cosmic application. This confidence that those who trust God will be vindicated is a cornerstone of our faith. Paul affirms this in Romans chapter 10, verse 11, quoting Isaiah, but giving it this universal scope. "For the scripture saith, Whosoever believeth on him shall not be ashamed."
So if David was worried about shame in the immediate temporal sense, Paul assures us we will not be shamed in the ultimate eternal sense. Our trust will be vindicated before the entire universe. That's a powerful connection that just elevates the stakes so much more.
It is. The practical action here is clear. When you're facing stress or the potential for worldly embarrassment because of your faith, you are called to actively lift your soul to God. You're placing your reputation in His hands. You have to be confident that He will act in a way that confirms your faith and honors His own name. That surrender in verse 1 is what unlocks the confidence in verse 3.
Okay, so once that foundation of trust is established, what's next?
Well, once David has surrendered and stated his confidence, the logical next step in his comprehensive, his acrostic prayer, is to ask for instruction. He is seeking knowledge not just for a temporary escape from the enemy, but for a deeper, sustainable relationship.
He needs to know how to proceed. He needs direction, not just immediate physical deliverance from the net.
Exactly. He's asking the God who saves him to also lead him. And look at the intense focus on instruction here. He uses 3 highly specific and related verbs in just 2 verses. It just underscores the sincerity and the depth of his request for orientation.
Show me thy ways, O Lord. Teach me thy paths. Lead me in thy truth and teach me. For thou art the God of my salvation. On thee do I wait all the day. Psalm 25.4-5.
Let's dedicate some time to defining those 3 concepts because I think they are often blurred. Show me thy ways refers to the broad, overarching principles of God's operation, the moral architecture of the universe. Think of the general principle of righteousness or justice or mercy. These are the ways he operates.
Okay, that makes sense. So if the ways are the big picture, the moral framework, what are the paths?
Teach me thy paths refers to the practical day-to-day application of those principles. So if God's way is to be honest, the path is the specific action I take today to deal honestly with my neighbor or my business partner. They are the safe, proper trails for the believer to walk on in practical terms. It moves from theory to execution.
And then we have lead me in thy truth. That seems like the most direct, moment-by-moment divine direction.
It is. It's a petition for divine direction based on established theological reality. David recognizes that God alone is the source of his salvation, which means both his present deliverance and his ultimate spiritual rescue. This makes Yahweh the only reliable teacher. This is the humility required of the meek person. It's choosing to submit to God's direction rather than relying on one's own finite and often panicked wisdom. I have to pause here. We've just asked for this profound guidance, but the concluding line is, "On thee do I wait all the day." If David is in a crisis, why the emphasis on waiting? I mean, isn't that a bit passive? That's a really necessary challenge. In biblical terms, waiting is not passive idleness. Not at all. It is active, expectant trust. It implies patience paired with persistent observance. You can imagine a soldier standing guard, actively waiting for the commander's orders. They are alert, they're ready to move, but they refuse to move until the order is given. David is consciously choosing to remain in an attitude of waiting and listening for God's direction throughout the entire day, refusing to execute his own panicked plan.
So the prayer asks for guidance, But the final action is maintaining a posture of readiness. And this desire for the instructional relationship, it finds its definitive fulfillment in the New Testament.
Absolutely. The You Need Faith in Jesus team highlights how this guidance that David craves is now met through the person of the Holy Spirit. Jesus promised the Spirit would serve precisely this function for every believer, guaranteeing access to divine instruction. We read this promise in John chapter 16, verse 13. Howbeit, when he, the Spirit of truth, is come, he will guide you into all truth. For he shall not speak of himself, but whatsoever he shall hear, that shall he speak, and he will show you things to come.
The Spirit guides us into the truth, so the principles, and shows us things to come, the practical path. It's the perfect answer to David's ancient prayer.
Therefore, the practical application for you, the learner, as advised by the source material, is vital here. The daily challenge is to start the day asking God to show you his paths and his principles, not merely to bless your own predetermined self-reliant agenda. That radical shift from requesting validation of my plan to requesting the path for his glory is really the essence of this submission.
Now, we observe a crucial pivot in the psalm. David moves from requesting guidance for the future to appealing to the very character of God. This feels like the pivot point of penitence in the prayer, where he has to remind himself and God of the theological foundation for his hope. And he does this before he can really confess his guilt.
That's right. He appeals to the eternal, unchanging nature of God, specifically his tender mercies and loving kindness. He is going straight for the ultimate covenant appeal.
Remember, O Lord, thy tender mercies and thy loving kindnesses, for they have been ever of old. Remember not the sins of my youth, nor my transgressions. According to thy mercy, remember thou me for thy goodness' sake, O Lord. Psalm 25.6-7.
This appeal rests entirely on the foundational Hebrew concept of his said. It is often translated as loving kindness, but it is so much richer than that. He said is not just simple kindness, it is loyal, steadfast covenant love. It's the divine loyalty that God commits to maintain, even when his people fail. So David is saying, Lord, you are bound by your own loyal nature, which has existed from eternity, ever of old.
So David is using theology as his leverage for grace. He's saying, define me by your unchanging covenant loyalty, not by my temporary failures.
That's precisely right. He asks God to forget his mistakes, specifically mentioning the sins of my youth, acknowledging that human fallibility and patterns of error have long characterized his life. He is asking for a radical redefinition. Define me by your mercy, not by my moral resume.
Okay, I need to challenge this, though, just based on the narrative flow. David has enemies surrounding him, and he desperately needs guidance. We established that in part 2. So why does he stop everything to address his past failures and appeal to God's mercy before he asks for specific rescue again?
That's the deepest insight of this section, and the You Need Faith in Jesus team materials really stress this connection. David knows he cannot receive effective, clear guidance or confident deliverance if there is an unaddressed barrier of unconfessed sin between him and God. Only a forgiven person can truly hear and follow God's path. Therefore, establishing the certainty of God's loyal nature, his Siva Zed, must precede all other petitions.
I see. So the confession is the prerequisite for intimacy and for direction. And this heartfelt plea, resting on God's faithful nature, is fully realized in the new covenant.
It is. David hoped for forgotten sins. We have the absolute certainty of it through Christ. The writer to the Hebrews confirms this, citing God's promise in Hebrews chapter 8, verse 12, For I will be merciful to their unrighteousness, and their sins and their iniquities will I remember no more. God essentially chooses amnesia regarding our guilt.
So the practical action for us when we are troubled by the memory of past failures is profound. We must acknowledge the sin. We can't pretend it didn't happen, but then immediately appeal to that finished work of Christ, praying something like, Lord, remember me according to the goodness you have already displayed through Jesus, your loyal character.
And that shifts the focus entirely from the magnitude of our failure to the magnitude of God's faithfulness. And this faithfulness is intrinsically linked to his role as teacher.
He connects God's character directly to his ability and willingness to instruct those who fail.
Yes, in verses 8 through 10, he praises God's absolute righteousness.
Good and upright is the Lord. Therefore will he teach sinners in the way. The meek will he guide in judgment, and the meek will he teach his way. All the paths of the Lord are mercy and truth unto such as keep his covenant and his testimonies. Psalm 25.8-10.
God teaches sinners because he is good and upright. His perfection is the reason. He doesn't abandon us to our ignorance. If God were cruel or arbitrary, he wouldn't bother teaching us. His goodness compels him to instruct. And notice the qualification. The recipient is the meek.
And we need to define meek again, because in modern use, it sounds like weak or passive.
Right. The Hebrew concept of meek here refers not to weakness, but to humility and a willingness to be taught. It's the opposite of the proud person who relies on their own wisdom. The meek are submissive to God's instruction, ready to accept His guidance over their own instincts. The path to receiving guidance, back in Part 2, requires this humble, penitent heart that we see here in Part 3.
And for these humble followers, God's paths, His dealings with them, are always a perfect balance of mercy and truth, undeserved kindness married to unwavering reliability.
That blend is the core of the covenant, and this leads us to the heart of the raw, penitent confession in verse 11, which serves as the crescendo of this whole section.
For thy name's sake, O Lord, pardon mine iniquity, for it is great. Psalm 25:11.
This is a remarkable statement. David admits his sin is great. He refuses to minimize it, recognizing the full weight of his failure. But the motive for pardon is not, pardon me because I've suffered enough or because I'm sorry. The motive is, for thy name's sake.
So why is the fact that his sin is great the reason he asks for pardon? That seems completely counterintuitive.
It's highly counterintuitive, but it's theologically profound. The motive is the glory of God's reputation as a forgiving God. The greater the sin pardoned, the greater the glory ascribed to the forgiver. David is praying, Lord, my failure is enormous. Use the magnitude of my failure to display the even greater magnitude of your grace. It makes salvation entirely about God's glory, not the sinner's worthiness.
That perfectly aligns with the New Testament.
Precisely. The You Need Faith in Jesus team reminds us that this concept underpins 1 John chapter 2, verse 12. I write unto you, little children, because your sins are forgiven you for his name's sake. Our forgiveness secures and magnifies the gracious name of God, who saves through Jesus Christ.
So what happens then? What happens when a believer chooses this comprehensive path surrender, seeking guidance and humble confession?
Well, the You Need Faith in Jesus team material details the incredible blessings that follow, and the pinnacle of which is deep intimacy with the divine. David asks the question, and then he answers it immediately, detailing 4 distinct benefits attached to fearing the Lord.
Before we list the benefits, let's nail down that phrase, fear of the Lord. It's not terror, right?
Absolutely not. It is reverent awe, a deep respect for God's authority that translates into obedience and humility. It is recognizing his cosmic power and choosing to submit your life to it. Those who maintain this posture of awe receive these profound benefits.
What man is he that feareth the Lord? Him shall he teach in the way that he shall choose. His soul shall dwell at ease, and his seed shall inherit the earth. The secret of the Lord is with them that fear him, and he will show them his covenant. Psalm 25:2-14.
The blessings just cascade from that one posture of awe. First, guidance. God teaches him the right path. He no longer struggles blindly. Second, peace. His soul shall dwell at ease. This is shalom, a deep, secure contentment that is unshakable because its foundation is God's character, not your circumstances.
And the third benefit is legacy. His seed shall inherit the earth. That sounds very literal, tied to the land of Israel. How does that translate for us today?
That concept is fascinating because it evolves. Historically, yes, it related to the physical inheritance of the promised land security for the family line. Theologically, as the You Need Faith in Jesus team highlights, the New Testament expands this. Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5, verse 5, that the meek inherit the entire earth, the spiritual kingdom. It promises a lasting generational blessing of security and ultimate ownership within God's eternal purposes.
And the fourth blessing is arguably the most compelling. The secret of the Lord is with them that fear him. This promise of secret relationship takes intimacy to an entirely new level.
This is where we need to dive deep. The Hebrew word here is sod. It literally means confidential counsel, a private discussion, or a secret assembly. It's not just a nice handshake. It means being brought into God's inner circle, privy to information and insight not shared with the general populace.
Can you give us an Old Testament example of this sod?
Absolutely. Think of Abraham. In Genesis chapter 18, verse 17, when God is about to judge Sodom and Gomorrah, God asks rhetorically, "Shall I hide from Abraham that thing which I do?" That is the sod God deciding to reveal his plans to a trusted friend. And this relationship isn't based on intellectual brilliance or social status, but entirely on that posture of reverent awe and covenant obedience.
So that means the key insight here is that friendship with God is not exclusive to a few prophets or kings. It's available to every believer who maintains that posture of reverent awe.
That's the core assurance. Jesus himself reinforced this, moving his disciples beyond the relationship of a servant who just follows orders without understanding the motive, to a friend. We see this affirmed so clearly in John chapter 15, verse 15. Henceforth I call you not servants, for the servant knoweth not what his Lord doeth, but I have called you friends, for all things that I have heard of my Father I have made known unto you.
That's phenomenal. The practical challenge then is whether we treat God's authority with such reverence that he trusts us with his confidential counsel. We can't expect to be in God's inner circle if we constantly rely on our own wisdom or treat his authority lightly. Intimacy is earned through obedient reverence.
And after reaching that peak of spiritual intimacy in the sod, being brought into God's inner circle, David immediately snaps back to his immediate painful reality. He has established the theological foundation, and now he brings his desperate present need directly to his friend and father. He is still in the net.
This section is just a masterclass in the honesty required in prayer confessing spiritual intimacy while simultaneously describing this overwhelming physical and emotional distress.
David starts this section by declaring his fixed intention, a conscious act of perseverance even amid the surrounding distress.
Mine eyes are ever toward the Lord, for he shall pluck my feet out of the net. Turn thee unto me, and have mercy upon me, for I am desolate and afflicted. The troubles of my heart are enlarged. O bring thou me out of my distresses. Look upon mine affliction and my pain, and forgive all my sins.
Psalm 25.15-518.
The net is the immediate dangerous trap set by his enemies or his circumstances. David's fixed gaze, mine eyes are ever toward the Lord, is his demonstration of active faith. He is confident that only the covenant God can free him. He refuses to look at the trap or the trapper. He looks at the rescuer.
And he is just brutally honest about his emotional reality, desolate, afflicted, and his troubles are enlarged. He's not putting on a brave face for God. His heart is literally swelling with distress. The emotional scale is important. He is modeling for us that we are encouraged to be completely transparent about the depth of our pain. But look closely again at verse 18. This brings us back to the key theological insight, the dual request.
Yes, he asks for deliverance from the external pain and the forgiveness of all my sins, the internal sinfulness.
David understands that his external trouble and internal sinfulness are interconnected, and he needs both rescue and redemption. Sometimes external suffering is the result of sin, but often external suffering simply exposes the unresolved sin within our hearts, our lack of patience, our bitterness, our fear.
So when we suffer, we should not just pray for the suffering to end, but we must also look inward, seeking God's help for both aspects of our distress simultaneously.
This complete honesty about the depth of our anxiety and pain is the posture the New Testament encourages. The You Need Faith in Jesus team points us to 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 7, casting all your care upon him, for he careth for you. Like David, we are called to cast the entire burden on our caring shepherd, both the burden of the troubles and the burden of the sin that those troubles expose.
The section then concludes with David returning to his enemies, but now he's focusing on his own defense and the importance of integrity.
Consider mine enemies, for they are many, and they hate me with cruel hatred. O keep my soul and deliver me. Let me not be ashamed, for I put my trust in thee. Let integrity and uprightness preserve me, for I wait on thee. Psalm 25.19-21.
The opposition is defined as severe, cruel hatred, and he repeats that central high-stakes plea, let me not be ashamed. But I have to challenge the premise in verse 21, let integrity and uprightness preserve me. Wait, isn't that relying on works? How does that square with the appeal to mercy we just heard in part 3?
That is a critical challenge. If David were relying on his own integrity to save him, that would be contrary to the Hensed appeal. But here he is relying on his integrity to preserve him. The source material helps clarify this distinction. He is not saying, I am good, therefore reward me. He is saying, I choose to live according to your paths and ways, as we requested back in part 2, and I trust that the fruit of your guidance, the integrity you produce in me, will be my operational defense while I wait.
So integrity is the result of trusting God's guidance, not the source of his justification. He trusts that living righteously while waiting will be his best defense because it prevents him from falling into the traps of his enemies.
That's the key insight. He is not saying, I will fight them back with my own strength. Thus, he is saying, I will live righteously while I wait, and my righteousness, guided by you, will protect me from their slanders and accusations. He trusts that God will use his moral soundness, his integrity, and his commitment to God's way, his uprightness, to preserve him through the situation.
And this sets the standard for how we deal with those who oppose us or slander us. The practical action is the relinquishing of vengeance.
It is the ultimate act of faith and submission. The You Need Faith in Jesus teen curriculum emphasizes this connection to Romans chapter 12, verse 19, giving us the New Testament application. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, Vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Our job is to maintain integrity and wait. God's job is to deliver and vindicate us in his perfect time, ensuring we are not ultimately put to shame.
We've followed David through this deep personal surrender, a plea for guidance, an honest confession, an experience of intimacy, and a cry for deliverance. But the final verse takes a monumental step outward. It shifts completely from me to us.
This action, which is highlighted by the You Need Faith in Jesus team, models essential spiritual citizenship, particularly for a leader. This verse stands outside the acrostic pattern, which suggests it was likely added during the final arrangement of the Psalter, adapting the highly personal prayer for national public worship. But the theological impulse is clear.
Redeem Israel, O God, out of all his troubles. Psalm 25.22.
David, as the anointed king and shepherd of God's people, moves beyond his personal crisis. He realizes that his own well-being is intrinsically tied to the well-being of the covenant community. His prayer for personal redemption naturally flows into a prayer for national redemption, asking God to rescue the entire community from all their troubles.
Why does the king's private prayer require a public conclusion? Why this massive leap outward at the end?
It demonstrates spiritual maturity and leadership. The private struggles of a godly leader are never solely private. They affect the entire community. If David is delivered, the whole nation benefits. If he is shamed, the whole nation is shamed. He shows us that once our personal needs are laid before God and we are secure in our forgiveness and guidance, our focus must immediately shift to contrition for others.
This reminds us that our personal faith must never leave us isolated. Our struggles and our victories should fuel our prayers for the broader body of Christ, the collective Israel.
We are reminded to actively commit to intercessory prayer. Our practical action is drawn directly from Galatians chapter 6, verse 2. Bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. When you pray for yourself, you are commanded to remember to pray for the redemption and deliverance of all of God's people. True spiritual health always looks outward, ending with the larger community in view.
So now let's take that step back and connect Psalm 25 to the broader themes of trust, suffering, and righteousness that define the rest of Book 1. How does this comprehensive prayer fit into the surrounding material, especially the challenging concepts we find in Psalms 32 and 37?
Psalm 25 is a crucial piece because it acts as a theological hinge. It takes the honesty of affliction found in texts like Psalm 22, the famous, my, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" and it merges it with the wisdom instruction found in Psalm 37, the penitential honesty of Psalm 32. It just reinforces that active trust is the bedrock of the covenant relationship.
And the sources consistently highlight trust as the foundation for stability, right?
Absolutely. Think of Psalm 27, which is built on the declaration of unshakable confidence. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? Or Psalm 31, which is David's declaration of surrender, parts of which Christ quoted from the cross. Into thine hand I commit my spirit, Psalm 31.5. The consistent lesson across Book 1, which Psalm 25 confirms, is that this act of trust is the foundation that leads to stability. The believer who trusts in Yahweh shall not be moved.
Let's look at the wisdom literature within this block, specifically Psalm 37. David spends much of Psalm 37 telling us not to fret over the wicked. That connects directly to the confidence in Psalm 25, where David asks not to be ashamed by his enemies.
Psalm 37 reinforces that confidence by providing the stark choice: trust in God versus reliance on fleeting human power. David commands us explicitly not to fret thyself because of evildoers, or be envious of the prosperity of the wicked because they are temporary. They will be cut down swiftly like grass.
So the alternative is a command to active spiritual submission.
Indeed. Instead of fretting, we are commanded to trust in the Lord and do good. So shalt thou dwell in the land, and verily thou shalt be fed. And the core instruction, Psalm 37, verses 4 and 5. Delight thyself also in the Lord, and he shall give thee the desires of thine heart. Commit thy way unto the Lord. Trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass. This gives assurance to the person waiting on God in Psalm 25, verse 3, that their patience will be vindicated because the wicked's victory is temporary and God's counsel is eternal.
But perhaps the most crucial connection for the learner is the tension between Psalm 25's ongoing affliction and the instruction regarding sin found in Psalm 32. Psalm 25 models the prayer for forgiveness. Psalm 32 models the mechanism of restoration.
This is perhaps the most important instructional connection the You Need Faith in Jesus team makes. In Psalm 25, David admits his sins are great and appeals to mercy. In Psalm 32, David tells us why hiding those sins is devastating. David teaches us that the consequence of keeping silence about sin leads to both spiritual and physical misery.
He describes a physical toll, doesn't he?
He does. He describes the spiritual decline and the physical consequences. When I kept silence, my bones waxed old through my roaring all the day long. For day and night thy hand was heavy upon me. My moisture is turned into the drought of summer. Psalm 32.3-4. Keeping silence led to emotional exhaustion and physical wasting.
But the act of confession reverses that misery instantly.
Instantly. The key insight is that immediate, honest confession brings immediate forgiveness and spiritual restoration. David says in Psalm 32, verse 5, I acknowledge my sin unto thee, and mine iniquity have I not hid. I said, I will confess my transgressions unto the Lord, and thou forgavest the iniquity of my sin. This honesty, which is modeled in Psalm 25.11, is the essential path to true intimacy and the deep contentment promised in Psalm 25:4-3, where the soul shall dwell at ease.
So the spiritual sequence is clear across Book 1. Trust God, as in Psalm 27 and 37, identify the blockage of sin, like in Psalm 32, confess honestly appealing to habit, which we see in Psalm 25, and then live in confidence, maintaining integrity while waiting for vindication.
It is the practical application of the core truth of Book 1. The path to security is found not in avoiding trouble or relying on self-justification, but in consistently turning toward the eternal covenant God, casting our cares and our entire lives upon Him.
So what does this all mean for us? This detailed prayer from Psalm 25 gives us the precise vocabulary and the required emotional honesty for an enduring relationship with God. It provides a comprehensive model for approaching our eternal King, combining deep self-examination with desperate appeal and humble, patient trust.
The overarching lesson of this text is that true security is found not in self-reliance, but in turning toward the eternal God. It's about casting our cares, as Peter taught in 1 Peter 5.7, and our very lives upon Him, knowing that, like Christ, our destiny is securely in the Father's hands, as we see in Luke 23.46. That posture of waiting, integrity, and intercession is the model we are given.
We have journeyed through Psalm 25, understanding it as a comprehensive guide for approaching God in need, seeking precise guidance, and finding confidence in His eternal covenant forgiveness.
To solidify your understanding of this lesson, be sure to use the flashcards to review key terms and then take the quiz. Passing the quiz will mark this lesson as complete.
Thank you for joining us for this in-depth discussion, facilitated by the profound insights provided by the You Need Faith in Jesus team. Keep seeking His face and keep learning.